Good evening, Facebook, and all those following. I am now going to do this live talk to discuss Tizer. So I'm on my laptop, so I'm hoping that this is all coming out. If anybody's watching, just give me a quick heads up that I'm coming out live before I start chatting away. So I'll just give it a couple of moments. Okay. Okay, if you joining me, excellent. If someone could just let me know that I'm coming out live, that would be or you can hear me. Sorry, no, that I'm coming out live. That you can hear me, that'd be great. Excellent. Okay, I'll make a start. So, I wanted to do this live to talk about. Oh gosh, lots of emotional emojis there. I wanted to do this live to talk about the dog that I currently have in with me to stay, and that's Tizer, the dog that I showed you earlier on. He's the border collie cross some sort of gun dog. I suspect a setter, just because of the way he acts, his facial structure, and his body appearance, and his movement, etc. I would have thought something like a setter of some type. He has been with me now. It will be 2 weeks on Monday, and as I discussed in my blog, I collected him from a student of mine who, due to various personal circumstances, is unfortunately had to find him a home, and she reached out to me to give us some help and support because he has some challenging behavioural issues. She described his behaviour as reactive, and she described it as aggressive towards other dogs. She felt his behaviour was very unpredictable with her own other dogs, and that she'd had several instances where there'd been fights between him and one of her other dogs, and she described them as unprovoked. And Tizer had, I think, at one point bitten the ear and caused damage to the other dog. I don't think there was anything like stitches. I think it was more superficial damage, but nonetheless, damage nonetheless. The other thing that she felt concerned about was that she just said the words that she described. Please, just to clarify this and give full disclosure, I've discussed that I was going to be doing this live, and my blog that was written about Tizer, and I've asked her for her okay, and if she's comfortable and happy that I discuss and share this information, and she was absolutely 100% happy to do so, because she wants what's best for the dog. So just wanted to clarify that so that nobody thinks that I'm sort of, and this is not about judgment. This is not about pulling somebody down or highlighting what they have and haven't done. It's about hopefully just giving you an idea of how a professional dog trainer who deals with dogs with behavioural problems views, and therefore hopefully helps this dog move forward, and eventually, the fairy tale ending would be he finds an amazing home, but we will come on to that as the weeks progress. So, as I discussed in my blog, I actually have known Tizer the majority of his life. He's only 18 months old, but he came to one of my competitive groups when he was about 12 to 16 weeks. He'd come for our rescue, and he was a bit of an impulsive reaction, impulsive choice. I think his owner would absolutely agree with that, and that she'd already had one dog from the rescue, and she took him on a bit prematurely. He was a bit of a spontaneous choice, and when she brought him to training, he was a very, very sweet dog, really sweet with people, really, really friendly, a bit overawed by the occasion, but I think it might have been even a couple of days after she got him, but really, really biddable. I handled him and played around with him, and he showed great responses. Just a dog that needed building up, a very soft dog. He wasn't the most outgoing, but he definitely wasn't a dog that he wasn't scared. He was more sensitive and aware, and definitely not a ball in the china shop. He was, but he wasn't fearful as such at that age. But what he did show at that age was he had an appeasing mannerism, or he showed a lot of appeasing behaviour when he greeted you. Very low body language, ears back, tentative on approach, and then once he was comfortable with you, it was sort of like what I call glue himself to you. So a little bit insecure, but then that's again could have been his circumstances, and obviously he hadn't been established in his new home, etc., etc. I would say now, looking back, that's definitely a characteristic within him. So as I explained in my blog again, I received a call a couple of weeks ago from his owner, who said that she has an unfortunate change of circumstances, which I'm not going to go into, certainly on live. But I will say that she's been got a lot of stuff going on, and she reached out to me to hopefully help her because she wants to do right by the dog. She isn't in a position to keep him, and she's very concerned about his behavioural problems and reached out to me because of his issues, hoping that I'll be able to help him. So obviously, given the circumstances, I knew the dog and I knew the owner, and again, I was more than happy to help if I can. So when I met him, as I explained again, he was very, very subservient, very edgy when he came out of the vehicle, which again was a different Tizer than what I'd seen in the past. So it'd been probably about a good year since I saw him prior to collecting him. And the thing that struck me was how cautious he was about, me being around in that environment. So he was brought to a venue where I teach regularly. He was got out of the vehicle, very, very cautious, very, very edgy, looking around a lot, etc., etc. And as I explained in the blog, there was kids at the location, and one of them happened to walk by a good distance away. It wasn't like the kid was right next to him, but a fair distance away, and he lunged out of them. And his demeanour definitely, I would say, would be fearful. Tail down, ears back, that hesitant lunge forward, but ready to draw back. So it was just not what I was expecting, I suppose. And I was quite surprised by his reaction. And although she told me he'd got like this, I was very much surprised at how bad it was. And obviously I was bringing him into my home. I have a young child, so all this is going through my head. So I got him home that evening, and I didn't get home till late. So whenever I bring a dog into my home, I don't rush the integration process. And I think that's something to be mindful of. Whenever you're bringing a puppy, older dog, rescue dog into your home, I'm very, very cautious about how I introduce them to my other dogs, because I don't want my other dogs to have a negative experience, and I don't want the new dog to have a negative experience. When I got back, it was quite late at night, so it was dark, so I definitely didn't do any introductions at that point. I sorted my dogs out, made sure they were comfortable, and then I put them away, and then I allowed him to come out and investigate his new environment, etc., and then settled him down. And then again, I didn't want to do it in that context of it being dark and he couldn't see and the other dogs all rushing him, etc., etc. So I left it. Next morning, our garden's designed so that there's two sections to our garden. So we did that when we first moved to the house because of having dogs. Wake up. My doggy cup. So because of having dogs in to train, and it was very important that they didn't necessarily have to be with my dogs if it wasn't appropriate, certainly initially. So the next morning I had 2 days where I had my schedule wasn't so intense, so I was able to spend a lot of time integrating Tizer into the home. First couple of days, all I did was allow him to meet my other dogs in smaller groups. And because his previous owner had said to me that she felt his reaction towards smaller dogs was so strong, he could possibly, she said, her words were, she felt that he might kill another dog, kill a small dog. I have small dogs, and I was very, very protective and cautious about how I wanted to do that introduction. So first couple of days, I just let them meet through the fence, and I observed his body language and his behavior. In hindsight, I normally would video it, but I didn't have my video set up for whatever reason, and I didn't see that initial reaction. But he has come from a home with multiple dogs, and although he's had issues in that home, I sort of wanted to see if his reaction was how strong it was. So I let him meet my other dogs, as I say, in smaller batches through the fence, and allow them to just be. My dogs are well versed in meeting other dogs, so they generally show a little bit of curiosity, and then they tend to, shrug their shoulders and move about their day because they know that dogs come and go in our house all the time. So they're not sort of overly, interested, to be honest, once that initial greeting has passed. So I then strategically introduced him to my dogs, and she did provide me with a muzzle. I had him in a muzzle, and I did it in a larger section of the garden where my other dogs were in that section, and I did it in two of my Thriller and Scoot, who are my oldest two dogs and very well versed in dogs. And they're very respectful of dog space, so they give them lots of space if appropriate. And I had him on a lead, had him on a muzzle, and they'd done some fence sniffing, and then they were off doing whatever they were doing in one side of the garden. I walked him in, and his reaction to them really gave me a strong indication that of how I'm going to approach his training, and I'm going to come back to that shortly. So that was that was a really strong indication of whether his behavioural problems are resolvable, or whether they're so deeply ingrained that they're beyond help, so to speak, or certainly so entrenched in the dog that it would be a lifetime of management, which is definitely an option for some dogs. But his reaction to them was cautious, but certainly not interested in attacking them, running at them and jumping them. Whether he was overawed by the situation, who knows, but this was sort of day 3 of having him here. So I gauged his response, and as a result of that, I took his muzzle off, and he was absolutely fine. He wasn't really interested in them, they weren't really interested in him, but he just milled on the periphery of the garden and went off sniffing. There's loads of bones, etc., and he showed a bit of interest in those, but generally speaking, there was not any interaction. Now, I then repeated that obviously with each of my dogs in various degrees, either individually, etc., and I moved through the process relatively quickly, and I did that relatively quickly because of the way in which he reacted. So if you look back to when I first met Tizer, he definitely didn't have any aggression issues when I first met him. So that tells me, if we look back again, I talked about the clues, that this is clearly something that's manifests itself later on in his life, and it's more than likely a learnt response to be reactive versus the dog being hardwired or having and a lot of instances with reactive dogs, there's a lot of key factors that will play a part. So if we discuss reactivity in dogs for a moment, there's generally speaking, I'm just going to make my screens, hopefully you can still see me, 5 reasons why dogs are commonly reactive. And the first one is genetics, and that could be the dog is genetically pre-programmed to, say, for example, chasing behavior, or they're dog-like border collies. They are almost hardwired to want to chase and react to fast-moving things. Same with terriers, etc., etc. There is certain breeds of dogs and certain types of dogs that have a predisposition to behavioral characteristics that could develop into being reactive. So motion sensitivity, heightened states of arousal, noise sensitivity, etc., etc. So genetics could be a player part. Now, the other aspect of genetics is you could have 2 dogs that have been bred together that may not have the strongest temperament, and therefore their puppies are likely to have a predisposition to behavior that would be perceived as reactive. In this instance, obviously, I don't know definitively about his genetics because he's an unknown quantity, but I would say that his breed characteristics would definitely play a part. So with Tizer specifically, as I said, I think he's a border collie cross, some sort of setter, and he shows probably both the best and worst of both breeds, in that he has a lot of gun dog, a little bit of neediness, a little bit of insecurity, a little bit of appeasement behavior, but coupled with border collie motion sensitivity and reactivity to anything fast moving. So, for example, he's obsessed with the broom. If you try to sweep anything, he goes absolutely ballistic trying to attack the broom. Very much a border collie thing. When you, if you have him, I was also told he likes to nip the owner's other two border collies. Very much a herding breed thing, trying to push them to move, trying to instigate, sheep, trying to get them to move, etc., etc. So again, he has traits from both breeds. So that would be something that could be affecting his behavior now. The next thing that could affect or create reactivity is socialization. And it isn't just the lack of socialization, it could be a negative experience in the formative stages of your dog's upbringing. Socialization in itself is actually quite a skilled process, and it's something that I spend as much time thinking about my dog's socialization and the lessons that they will have in life as I do teaching my dog to do a sit, a down, a stand, skills for obedience or agility, etc., etc. I place as much importance on my dog's socialization, and often more so with certain breeds of dogs. For example, like a Malinois, who are very driven and very intense, and generally speaking, struggle with being normal, should we say, in day-to-day life. It's something that I place a lot of emphasis on. With all my dogs, I place a lot of emphasis on socializing them appropriately. So arranging and instigating meets with them that are going to be productive and conducive to them turning into a well-adjusted, balanced family pet. The third reason why, which can create reactivity issues, is understanding. And when you're talking about understanding, that's really about training. So, how good is the dog's self-control, how good is its impulse control, how good is its understanding of the cues, sit, down, a recall, etc., etc. I would say that observing Tizer, that could be a lot better. His recall is very, very sketchy, depending on what's going on. With nothing in the environment, low key distractions, if any distractions, it's not bad. It could be better. So therefore, in a heightened state of arousal with more distractions, it's going to be non-existent. Fourth reason why dogs tend to be reactive, or that can be an indication of reactivity, is physical. Is there a physical underlying concern with the dog? And it could be dietary, it could be medical, it could be discomfort, and that could be reasons that cause or create reactivity. Now, in the case of Tizer, I would say there was a physical aspect that would play a part. And when we're talking about physical, I would also say stimulation as well. Physical stimulation comes under that heading, and that's something that I would say would be a factor with him. And the last thing is trauma. Trauma on the part of could be either the experience of the dog has been the recipient or of an act of aggression, or the trauma could be with the person that owns them and that they've witnessed the dog display or be the recipient of aggressive behavior, and that then creates anxiety within them, and that transfers onto the dog. So those are generally the reasons why, and you can, in various degrees, you can see most reactivity behavior will be one of those 5 things. So in regards to Tizer specifically, if we, as I said, the genetic aspect, there could be a predisposed tendency towards behavior that could develop into reactivity, motion sensitivity, nipping at other dogs, being aroused by motion, etc., etc. The other bit that could be affecting him genetically is his, appeasement behavior, he has a little bit of a separation anxiety, which has shown itself, which is getting way, way better. He gets a bit needy if he's left. If you put him in a crate, he's fine. If you leave him anywhere where he can see you but can't access you, he can get a little bit edgy when that happens. That's a very much a lot of dogs have it, but I'd say gun dogs tend to get a little bit needy and attached and latch onto their people, and not in a slightly insecure way they can be, and you can often find they do things like self-harm or self-mutilate, or they can have behavioural issues as a result of that unhealthy attachment. So socialization with Tizer, I would say it was a chicken and the egg. His owner described that at 6 months old, his behaviour problems started to arise, and obviously what then happens is as a handler, if you either don't have access to a lot of the right type of dogs, or you're not confident about the dog's reaction, you can then effectively hibernate and avoid and not progress that the dog's socialization in a proactive and productive manner, which can then result in the dog developing, a little bit of phobia around other dogs or different types or sights and sounds. And I would say there may be an element of that with Tizer in that because of his behaviour, his owner admitted that she was reluctant to take him out and about and expose him because he was a bit of an unknown quantity. So it's a chicken and the egg. The dog behaves inappropriately, so then you don't expose him enough, which then creates the problem again. In terms of his understanding, as I say, there's things that we can do to help him with his training, which one of the big things that I will definitely address is his recall and put a lot of work into getting his recall stronger. So we've started to do some recall games with him. In terms of his physical, several things that I've done. One is I have increased his exercise a lot. Again, it's a chicken and egg scenario. If you have a dog with the behavioral problem, the tendency is to not let them off the lead, not them have a lot of freedom. Again, his recall's not the best, etc., etc., etc. I'm very fortunate in that I have access to lots of locations where I can walk my dogs in its private venues. The other thing is I have, where I live specifically, I can essentially, go out for several hours and not see any people. So, because it's very, very rural, which is fantastic for dogs like Tizer, it means that I can take him out for an extended period of time. He has freedom, yet he doesn't meet any other dogs. So I appreciate not everybody has that option. Sometimes it takes being a bit creative about it, hiring venues, speaking to people with fields that you can hire, or picking the times when you walk your dogs, etc., etc. Can help you use some of that energy or expel some of that energy within your dogs, which can help their behavioral issues. So in regards to trauma, I suspect that there's been both aspects. Tizer had probably a level of trauma in terms of his engagement with the other dogs in the household, and that there was a couple of instances, and his owner said that there was no signs, it was totally unprovoked. I would suggest that there was probably more subtle things going on there. And the other simple thing could be just a hormone surge, which has made him a little bit more, likely to be the recipient of aggressive behaviour, or vice versa. That could be something that was going on in the house that wasn't picked up as such, and therefore the dog then, the totally random event actually isn't so random. So the question now is, how do I move this all forward with this dog? So a couple of things that initially, I'm going to go back, so I'm going to digress. So after I got Tizer used to my other dogs, I actually moved that on very, very quickly, and I introduced him to my other dogs. He's actually with my other dogs now, and he's been here 2 weeks all the time now. So he's with my dogs, and he has as much freedom as any of the other dogs. He is he's with Sugar, he's with Sonic, he's with any dog that I own. He has he's with them, and there is, touch wood, no concern that I have about his interaction. I don't look at his reaction to Sugar and think that it's concerning, and I suspect that a lot of his issue was probably context specific, in that he may have been on a lead, it might have been the environment, it could have been the anxiety being between the relationship. My dogs, I'm very, very lucky in that they're all very, very well adjusted, they're well socialized, they've had lots of positive experience with dogs, and they are, Sugar's got an amazing all of my dogs do, but Sugar has exceptionally good dog skills, and she understands how to read dogs and give them space, etc. I've said this before in various blogs. But I would say that was across the board with all my dogs. So my initial observations with him was he doesn't have the best social skills. So, for example, he was a typical male dog, young male dog, he was a bit inappropriate with Mighty, and Mighty gave him very distinct, clear signals initially. So she looked at him and gave him a very hard stare. She then intensified that and stepped towards him. He didn't take any notice. She then gave him a low grumble with a little bit of a lip curl. Didn't take any notice until she air snapped at him. When she did that, his reaction was disproportionate. He jumped out of his skin. You would think that he'd been, like sort of attacked by a grizzly bear. He ran off and sat in the corner and stayed there for a considerable amount of time. So what that tells me is that he clearly has a history of, a fear based on a dog telling him off, so to speak. And Mighty's body language and her information was absolutely textbook. She did it brilliantly and just very appropriately said to him, I don't appreciate you, being rude about my personal space. And she gave him an appropriate, which he didn't read any of that initial, the hard stare or the look or the eye contact, the stepping towards, etc., etc. He didn't read any of it until she air snapped to him, and then his response was so disproportionate. So, in terms of socialization, ideally, what would have happened in hindsight would he would have been mixed with lots and lots of dogs throughout his youth. And each one would have been a learning experience, as opposed to when I introduce my puppies or my young dogs to other dogs, there's a specific purpose. That dog is meeting the hairy, beardy because I want the dog to meet a hairy, beardy. It's meeting the pug because I want it to meet a squashy-faced dog or a black dog or a white dog, etc. There's a lesson to be gained from meeting that dog. The goal is to have my dog comfortable with all dogs in any shape or size and to read the appropriate body language that they give and the signals they give so that my dogs become well-versed in reading other dogs, and also means that they're going to avoid antagonizing other dogs, but they're also going to develop their own social skills and their own ability to read that when the dog comes up with a really squashed face and a stern expression, it doesn't necessarily mean that that dog comes, with intent to cause you harm, and therefore you don't have to be defensive, etc., etc. So obviously with my dogs, he's met 9 dogs of different shapes, sizes, breeds, squashy faced dogs, small dogs, female, male. So he's had sort of a really intensive socialization, which to be fair to him, he's actually done really, really well with. He hasn't, other than behaving maybe sexually inappropriate and a bit rude, he hasn't sort of showed any ill intent. He hasn't showed any aggressive behaviour as yet, and obviously it's only the beginning stages. What I tend to do if I'm going to leave him and go out, then I tend to put him in a crate for safety purposes. But if I'm around and my dogs are around, then he's with my dogs, and he's absolutely been textbook. So that's been really, really successful. The other thing that I have done is increased his exercise. Anybody that knows me will know that I'm quite fanatical about walking my dogs. And I've taken Tizer out with them. He has a harness and a long line, so I always have a safety net. I tend not to call him by his name on a walk because his recall is non-existent. What I do is just either police it, corral him in, pup, get a bit of his attention, etc., until I'm put adequate work into his recall. So it's a bit of a chicken and the egg, in that I need to burn off some energy and burn off some steam. He's a young adolescent male dog. He has been castrated, so that's one less thing to concern me. But he needs an outlet. He needs to burn off some energy and let off some steam. And it's a good way for him to be out with my other dogs. He's got an incredibly, which is where his border collie head comes out, a very, very strong chase instinct. He will run and run and run and run with the collies or with my dogs intently for the whole walk, to the point of where he won't go to the toilet for at least I think the quickest he's done it was in an hour into a walk, because he's so intent on chasing them. So which is a pretty, not an unusual situation for a dog. It's a bit like, you've exposed them to the sweet shop. They're just too distracted by what's going on to can't be mooch about enough to go to the toilet, etc., etc. So that's the one thing that I have done with him, is increased his exercise. Um, the other thing that I've been doing is doing little bits of training. He has had a little bit of training throughout his life, so I've picked that up and done a bit of mental stuff, so that it's expelling his grey matter and hopefully utilizing it in a productive manner, as opposed to if you don't, with certain types of dogs, especially from those breeds like a border collie and a gun dog, if you don't use that brain, sometimes what can happen is you can get pent up frustration or behavioral issues as a result of that. So, I've just done little bits of training. I've done a bit of shaping behavior, which he's needs more development on. What he has shown when I shape him is he gets very, very cautious about anything that's new, or like I have a video and I'll post it throughout the week. Him being shaped to stand on a large blue disc, which had a little bit of movement on it, and I wanted to see his reaction, and he was very, very cautious. He came through it very quickly, but he was definitely dubious about it. So there's a bit of suspicion to new things, which again is a lack of confidence. The other thing that I've also done with him is one of the things that can be a factor of reactivity or certainly behavioral issues is diet. And he was fed, he came in good condition, there was no issues with what he was eating per se. Those of you I'm sure are aware, I'm sponsored by Pro Dog Raw, and they're a company that I cannot sing their praises enough of for several reasons, and that they are very much about the dog. Their customer services is phenomenal, but more importantly, they can actually give you advice related to specific concerns you may have. So, for example, Sugar had has a chicken allergy, and I messaged Heidi at ProDog, and she straight away gave me some advice about what was appropriate to give her, etc., and gave me some information which was super helpful. So one of the things that often can happen with dogs that are a little bit that have reactivity or can be a little hyper or etc. or overstimulated is I put him on white meat, so things like turkey, fish, etc., and reducing things like beef in his diet. So I've just changed him onto fish and turkey. Now, I don't have the science about it. I don't have there is lots of information out there. I'm not going to even attempt to give you that information. But what I would say is that often dogs that have that, if you take this back to horses, you have horses that you would tweak their diet to affect their behavior and their performance. And it's definitely the same with dogs. I'm fortunate in that I have, a smorgasbord of options with Pro Dog Raw, and that they do so many different varieties, I can cater it for the dog. So I've given him Pro Dog Raw, turkey and some fish to help see if that it just takes that little bit of edge off him. As a sideline, what I will do for those of you watching, and if you want to check out Pro Dog Raw, I'll put a link in the comments. And for your first order, if you use KF25, you'll get 25%, which is a quite hefty discount off your first order. So a great little bonus there, but I'll share that in the comments. So the other thing that I've started to do with Tizer, I took him on a seminar I did this weekend, was start to introduce him to just one strange dog at a time. So the other dog is in the distance, it's, minding its own business, sat down with its owner, and I'm just doing bits and pieces with him in the periphery, and allowing him to investigate, show curiosity to the dog. I posted a video of his initial reaction where he met another dog. The dog it was a black coat, made eye contact with him, and he absolutely kicked off. You saw in the video, he saw his reflection in the mirror, again, caused an outburst. So it's clearly when dogs make eye contact with him that he's a little bit more likely to react. So as happens with dogs with behavioral problems and reactivity, I was out for a walk yesterday with him, and I was rushing to go and pick up Lee from school. So I was a little bit rushing back to the car, had all my dogs with me. Somebody was coming through the kissing gate where I back to the car park, and they had their dog with a chuck-it stick, and the dog was a little border collie, and it was running around like a headless chicken in anticipation of this ball launcher being thrown. which then sparked him up. Luckily, all my other dogs were with me. I just got them to wait with me or hang about, so they didn't react, which was great. And he went off, and all I did was back off and to create some distance, and eventually he calmed down, and I just placated the situation. Not the best dog training, but it happens. That's life. Sometimes you just have to deal with the situation as best unfold. He didn't have any negative experiences because I just mooched him off in the opposite direction. I had treats with him, with me, which I gave him some once he calmed down. I waited for the person to eventually pass, which seemed like an eternity, as it always does, and just remedied the situation and put it back in the car. I know there's a lot of work to be done. I need to set up that in a situation with dogs, and then increase the movement of the other dog, and so forth to deal with his reactivity. Because eventually I want to be able to have him with my dogs and him not be the dog that's going to react. And therefore, the person that subsequently takes him on has a dog that they can walk with multiple dogs and him not be the catalyst for concern or for issues. The other thing that I've done with him, so I'm working on him one by dog and building distance away from them and decreasing the distance will be the next project. Diet, getting him on some food without so much red meat in his diet. Increases exercise, and I'm working on his recall and sits and downs and stimulus control around, impulse control around things that move. So I'm using he's obsessed with, as I said, with the broom. So I'm going to build that to a point where he can hold a control position whilst the broom is moving in front of him. So therefore teaching him to have a level of self-control or impulse control around something that he really, really wants to chase. So that's a precursor to him being able to be out in a big wide world and cope with things in front of him moving quickly. So that's another little to-do list. He likes his food. I would say his food drive is okay. It's moderate. I have used his, again, one of the things I often get asked is diet. And so although my dogs are raw fed, and he's on raw food now, he's on Pro Dog Raw, I take a little bit of that out in a bag and I would use that as training treats with him to work his recall. I want to use really high value reinforcement, and I want to use hand feeding as a way to connect myself with the dog. That's really, really important. So that I'm creating that I'm building my value to the dog, and you could say that's the bond that we're forming and that level of trust. I want him to look to me and connect with me and gravitate to me in situations where he shows concern or apprehension. So hand feeding is another thing that I've implemented with him to try and work on his behavior and getting a response. The other thing that I'll be working on is focus games, so that eventually if he's in a situation where he isn't comfortable, he will focus and gravitate back to me in order for me to deal with the situation, create distance, move away, etc., whatever it may be. So hopefully that plan of action will eventually lead to him being comfortable and confident enough around dogs, not only my dogs, but strange dogs. In the future, what I want to start to do is do some parallel walking with other dogs, which I did with the flat coat. We did some parallel walking, which was really productive, and just do short bursts. So he can be around dogs that he doesn't know and not act inappropriately. The big challenge is going to be having those dogs moving fast around him and him showing self-control. That's going to be quite a big struggle to overcome. And the other thing is new situations. So thinking about where I walk him, I tend to walk him at the moment in open fields. So locations where I can see for a considerable distance. And the reason being is that I can then plan my route and protect his exposure to dogs. So if I see another dog coming, I change direction and avoid them, basically, because I don't want him to approach dogs that he doesn't know. So hopefully that's given people an idea of my plan of action. I'm going to keep posting videos about him so you can see how I'm progressing with him. Question here was about not so much red meat. Why? So again, I'm not going to quote the science on it, but there is I think there's been studies about red meat linking to I can't remember the terminology, but it basically it could be a factor that contributes to I know it's protein levels or hyperactivity, etc., that could contribute to the dog being a little bit more edgy. I could be totally off the ball. I've known with another dog that I've dealt with in the past, and it definitely made an impact with that dog. One of the things that we're advised to do was change the dog's diet, and it drastically helped. And there's been other dogs that I've suggested to look at the dog's diet, or to certainly contemplate evaluating the dog's diet, and it's definitely helped. So I'm gonna I've done that with him just to is another way to help him with his behavior. So when you're dealing with something like reactivity, you can't just look, it's not, as you can see in the causes of his behavioral problems, it's a holistic solution to helping him overcome his phobias and his fears and his concerns. It's not going to be the one thing that's the magic trick, which is always the case with all dog training. It's a holistic approach. It's about looking at it from several angles, and hopefully a combination of all those things will result in the dog hopefully developing his confidence and having lots of positive experiences with other dogs and people, etc., etc. Any other questions before I close this live? Okay, so hopefully that's given you an idea of a little bit about Tizer, the problems that he currently has, and my plan of action of how I'm going to move it all forward and hopefully overcome some of his issues. This is not going to be a quick fix. I know that much. I've trained enough dogs to know this is not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take time, and it's going to take patience. And I foresee it taking at least, a month, if not more, to see any significant impact. I mean, I have to say I've seen a considerable amount of impact thus far, but this is going to be, for anybody that takes him on, a continual thing that they need to build on. He's an absolutely super dog. He's incredibly talented when it comes to obedience, for example, and I will post some videos of showing little pieces of work that I've done with him to see how talented he is and the potential within him. But the irony is that none of that will ever show itself unless his behavioural issues and his confidence around other dogs has been addressed, or certainly improved. So that's the project. That's where we're at with him. Hopefully this has been an interesting live for you to see and discuss what I do with dogs like Tizer. Again, for those that just reminded me, I'm doing a seminar on the 9th of February in Sheffield on reactivity in dogs, or specifically reactivity. It's a very topical conversation at the moment, in that I would say it's one of the things that's very, very prevalent in dog training and dog ownership at the moment. Dealing with the reactivity, how to avoid reactivity, what do I do if my dog is reactive, is it fixable, inverted commas, and if you want to find out a little bit more, check that out on the 9th of February. I will probably do more on online stuff throughout the year, webinars, so keep your eyes open for that. For now, I will post the Pro Dog Raw link and the discount code if you want to have a look at that. They're a company I can't sing their praises enough, and I tend not to put my name to things that I don't believe in. So a really great food. Check them out, have a look. And Janice Woodcock. Okay, so I'm going to answer this question before I go. So the question was, do you think you will ever be able to address the child situation? So fortunately, I have a pre-made child, which I'm not going to use her as bait per se, but I have access to a little person that I can, strategically and systematically have him around and build his confidence up. Yesterday was the first time that I had Neve and him together, and Neve always makes a thing of feeding. She likes to come and help me prep my dog's food and feed my dogs. That's her little thing, and that we do together. And after he'd eaten, Neve likes, or after my dogs eat, Neve likes to go and pick up the bowls. That's her little job. She likes to do that. So what I did was I just had him in a crate, and Neve was in on the couch. She normally likes to sit up on the workbench, so a good distance, everybody's safe, etc., etc. And I just observed I have several crates up so that I can position him either closer or further away. I put him at the furthest crate away, and again, his reaction was exactly like it was with my dogs. He was really like, he was curious. He was, I wouldn't say overly cautious. And then I gauged that, and then I put him in a crate closer to her, and I observed his body language. And again, he was very, he wagged his tail, and when he saw her, when she made noises, he was curious about her. He was sort of air sniffing, etc., etc. And I actually got to the point of where she was on the floor, milling around, and he was on a lead, and they were both together, and he was absolutely fine with her. He was more curious. It was more like she was a novelty item versus concerned or aggressive or fearful. So I haven't, that was the only one session I did yesterday with him. It was very, very, I was very cautious about how I did that. And obviously they haven't made any physical contact. Neve was off playing on a fit ball. She likes to go and play with the fit ball bones. And he was at the other end, and I had a crate right next to me. So if anything, he did start to get uncomfortable, I could pop him in the crate and shut the crate. So everybody's safe. Always put safety above everything else. And his reaction was absolutely textbook. He was curious. He was quite, he reacted to her like he would any person that he's met, and he's very friendly, and he's very happy with people, or again, the appeasement thing, but he's very sweet with people, and he was very sweet with her. Now, over the next couple of sessions and a couple of weeks, I will see how they go from there, and I'll build it from that point, and looking to him for the guidance of how quickly I move to having him and her around each other. So do I think you'll ever be able to, I would say at this point, yes, I think that he's going to be a dog that can be around. Certainly Neve. I'm not going to make the generalization with kids as yet, because I've only met her, and she's very, the thing about Neve is a bit like my dogs in that she's very dog savvy. So she doesn't rush up to them. She largely ignores them. She's occupied doing her own thing up the other end. She sees so many dogs in my home that she doesn't sort of go all puppy and want to run up to them. She doesn't, her interaction with them is she never rushes up and tries to grab them or pet them. She's always on the periphery of them. So she's a very well socialized, dog-friendly kid. That isn't everybody's kid. So I'm dubious to make the statement of if I'll be able to get him over all children. That will be a longer-term project. So for now, I'm really, really happy with how he interacted with her. And it's a similar thing to how he interacted with my dogs. Because my dogs read him and realized that he didn't want them invading his space, they gave him sufficient space and time to adjust and come round. Same with Neve. Neve didn't overstep the mark, so he was able to just be comfortable and show the appropriate, level of curiosity and etc. etc. And because she didn't do anything inappropriate, he's had a tick in the child friendly box. I need a load more tick before I'm willing to say that this dog is 100%. And whether that's ever possible with a dog that has shown, inverted commas, aggression around children is a long way off me being able to say that. But we will, then take each day as it comes. So I'm just going to have a look if there's any more questions. Ricky Bradley, do I use a muzzle? So he had a muzzle that come with him, Ricky. I don't use it on him, I have to say. Now, again, when he met Neve, I could have easily put the muzzle on him. When he puts the muzzle on, he tends to clam up. He tends to get a bit tense. Now, what can often happen if you muzzle train a dog when they behave inappropriately, the muzzle can become paired with a level of anxiety. So, if you ideally what would happen is everybody would train their dogs to accept a muzzle or a head collar or things around their face, so that if the point of where you ever need it, your dog, that isn't the dog's first exposure to it. What I think has happened is it was put on or used after the he'd shown inappropriate behaviour. So even in the process of putting it on, they almost have a conditioned emotional response for us, and that we become uncomfortable. I mean, who wants to see a dog wearing a muzzle, for example? And we can get a little bit of a thing about it. So and he definitely reacted. He got a little bit more guardy and a bit cagey with it on when I put it on him, and he was a lot more relaxed without it off. And again, when I introduced him to Neve, Neve was at one end. He was literally next to the door of the crate. My reactions are pretty not bad. Yeah, I'm not bad. So I felt that the distance it would take Neve to get to me and me getting in the crate and shut the door was a safe enough distance. When you're working with dogs like Tizer, you're constantly doing a little. This is for my former vocation. You're constantly doing a risk assessment on the situation, and if the temperature changes and if the mood changes, I'm making an adjustment to the environment or the situation. But you're constantly doing almost a living, breathing risk assessment as you go, second by second by second. And if anything changes, I'm making adjustments within that. And again, in that instance, I felt it was appropriate not to use his muzzle. What I would suggest is teach your dog to accept a muzzle, for then it's always an option if ever you need it, rather to use it when you don't need it than when you have to use it. Okay. Could you discuss his appeasement behavior at some point? So what tends to happen with dogs that are, like, especially see it very much in gun dogs, in that they can get very sort of try to ingratiate themselves by, laying on you and like being quite ears back and tail down and very licky lipped, etc., etc. As opposed to a dog that's confident in himself and sort of like a bit more like happy-go-lucky and says hi, comes up for a fuss, and then takes himself off and investigates whatever. He almost latches himself onto you in a somewhat needy manner, and definitely when the dogs are around, he tends to want to latch and be close to you, and that's a level of insecurity that again is improving. I've done lots of feed one dog and I do a lot of that with my dogs, so they're very well versed with feeding multiple dogs around them and food being present when they're around. With Tizer, again, same. I put him in a crate, feed him some treats, feed my other dogs, and then gradually we've got to the point of where he can be fed treats or whatever around when dogs are around. And also then, allowing them to wander off. I'd like to call them in, give them some treats, and off you go, and everybody wanders off and does their own thing, to teach them that he doesn't have to latch on to me. He doesn't have to, attach himself to me and in an unhealthy manner. It's not a negative thing, a dog that's a little bit needy, because you can use that to your advantage to create a really, really strong relationship. But there's always, like everything, it's tipping the scales into to the point of where the dog is unhealthily attached to you, where the dog can't be left, where the dog forms a little bit of an unhealthy attachment to you as an individual. And that would be, I'd say, a little bit where he's got. But the other thing, when they form such a intense, unhealthy attachment, the slightest change in your temperament or anxiety, they can sometimes have a negative reaction. So dogs are naturally, it's the nature of our relationship with them. We form a very close affinity. But what we also need to be mindful of is that that's reliant. That can also mean that if we're not confident, and somebody's made a comment about confidence, that he's building his confidence on my confidence. Absolutely. I go into a situation and I'm confident in the situation. He's going to pick up on that energy given off from me. If you have any anxiety because of the way the dog's going to react, often that can be a cycle. If you have a dog that's a little bit more needy, they can be a little bit more of a time bomb. All right. So, as I say, appeasement behavior isn't a problem, and it's a way in which your dog will ingratiate itself to you, or sort of, to other dogs. He shows it a little bit in situations that you would think it isn't really necessary for you to be grovelly towards me. Even when it's just him and I, there is no need for him to be grovelly to me, and I'm just, mooching. He'll come and sort of like show that needy behaviour in those circumstances when really there's no need for him. So I would say that that's a little bit of insecurity within him. So any more questions? Hopefully I've answered them all. If you have any more, just post them in the comment section and I'll pick them up. I'm actually going to go and feed my dogs and what have you. So I'm going to love you guys and leave you guys. Hopefully, as I said, this conversation has been helpful. There's going to be a lot more you're going to see from me and Tizer over the next couple of weeks, if not longer, whilst he's with me, working on his confidence and dealing with a dog that has behavioral issues that a lot of you guys out there have with your dogs. Hopefully this can empower you and give you some information. The big thing to take from this is we don't always have the information like I do with Tizer to be able to definitively say what is the dog's what's the cause of the dog's issues. However, what I can do is only look at what the dog has at present. Yes, it's great to have the information to say he's behaving like this because he doesn't like black dogs because he was attacked by a black dog. Now, that would be great to have that information and to definitively say on this day at this time this dog was attacked by a black dog. Great. But often we don't have that information. Often even the dog's reaction isn't necessarily. So, the dog is got a version of black dogs, but the reason being is because he's generalized a large dog to a large black dog to then all black dogs. Yeah, so it doesn't necessarily mean that what the dog is showing is consistent with what actually happened. But what I can do is look at what the dog is currently and look at what I would like him to be and formulate some sort of plan or strategy to get me from point A to point B. So at the moment I have a insecure, anxious dog who lacks confidence around other dogs and a little bit of confidence around people. And as a trainer, owner, whatever, it is down to us to pick the bones of what is the dog does and look at what we want and formulate a plan of how to get there. So yeah, quite needy. So just a quick question. My dog is quite needy and sometimes growls when a person approaches. What is the best thing to do at the moment? That's the $64 million question. So I tend not to comment too much to be truthful about hypothetical situations because a dog growling, there could be 1,000 reasons why that could be. I always take growling as information. A dog will growl because it's trying to tell you something, and it's down to us to deduce what that is. Is the dog concerned about people? Is it apprehensive about people? Is it worried? Is it resource guarding? There could be 1,000,001 reasons. I would take that as information and try, by the process of elimination, work out what it is that the dog is concerned about. Is it men? Is it women? Is it hats? Is it jackets? Is it shoes? Etc. Etc. A dog that can appear growling at a person could actually, we break it down, could be that the dog is scared of the sound of their trousers rustling together or their keys jangling, etc. etc. So be mindful to break it all down and try and work out what part of the behavior or the reaction is really the core root of the problem. And then once you've got worked out what it is, so the dog that appears to be growling at the person is actually growling at their keys moving in the pocket, then implement a strategy to try and overcome that issue. If a dog shows a sudden random act of aggression, or it could be pain, it could be physical. So the other thing is if the dog is, if your dog, just as hypothetical, the dog that growls when approached by people, has the dog had an injury? Does it have a history of people approaching it from behind, say for example a vet, to check its back end or its foot, etc.? Does it have a history of people approaching it equating to pain and discomfort? That's another thing that could trigger a dog to be aggressive. It could see the picture of the person approaching them from a certain angle, and that could trigger them to think, oh, pain, discomfort, etc., etc. So it's always worth spending the time trying to work out what the actual behavior is, and try to be as specific as you can. Try to break it down to specifics of men, women, apparel that they're wearing, clothing, hats, not situations. Is it a certain thing? Is the dog doing something in relation to you, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so hopefully that information's been helpful. I'm gonna love you guys and leave you guys. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday evening. and I will surely post. I will be posting loads of videos about Tizer over the next couple of weeks. Look out for those. If you want to find out more information before I go, finally join my Kamal Fernandez dog training group, free Facebook group. Join that for loads of information about lots of the dogs that I've trained with behavioural problems and reactivity issues and puppies, etc., etc. Have a look there, and yeah, I'll catch up with you guys another time. Thank you for joining. Take care.